Diane, you have a guest, and then afterwards I wanted to ask you about one of your residents and how they're doing. We'll get into that. But first, please introduce this nice lady that has come in with you.
Well, Chris, it's my pleasure to introduce Denise Spadaccia. Her mother, Fran Borden, was a resident at Crossroads House last year, and she passed in June of 2019. So it's been about a year, a little over a year. But I asked Denise to come here today because I'd like her to just share with people what a comfort care home is. You know, I'm all about the story, and I like people to know what goes on behind the door at 11 Liberty Street.
We have, you've been able to bring current residents to talk about their experience. You've brought people who have had an experience years ago, whether it was volunteering or a family member. Now, this is something fairly recent within the last year. This is a new perspective. And Ms. Spadaccia, thank you. Let me get it right. Mrs. All right. Welcome.
Thank you.
And it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. So your mom, she died about just over a year ago.
Just over a year ago.
And it was the experience of whose choice to go to the Crossroads House.
Well, it's kind of interesting. When she was nearing the end, she had come to stay with me at my home.
Mm-hmm. Where was she residing at that time?
She had been in Cobleskill prior, living on her own.
Oh, wow.
But I lived here in Batavia, and it was time for her to live with one of us.
Right. She needed to be taken care of.
She did.
Yeah.
So she came to live with me. It's easy for me to make a separate bedroom down on the main floor.
Okay.
You know, and easy. Really, it's a comfortable place for her. She's recouped at our house from different things.
Right. So she was familiar with it.
She was familiar with that. However, she started really having some problems not too long after she got to our home, and she ended up in the hospital. She was just having a lot of pain. She couldn't, and at one point we just couldn't get her out of bed. So we had to call an ambulance. They took her, and that's when she was diagnosed. She had never been diagnosed with cancer. That was the farthest thing from her mind, and she had bone cancer, which is why it was so painful, and it had metastasized to her lungs and a few different things. And so
she was aware of the situation.
Oh, very, very much so. My mom was bright really up until the end.
Let me ask you before we get into the reasonings before she went in. Tell me a little bit about her, Mrs. Borden. Where is she from, and how did you come about, and how did she end up in Cobleskill, and the whole detail? I'd like to know a little bit about her.
Sure. She and my dad were both actually Canadian-born, province of Quebec.
Oh, boy.
Naturalized citizens for the States. Yes. And she grew up, and my dad actually, they grew up in Messina, New York.
Oh, I know where that is.
They moved over as children, grew up in Messina, had known each other.
Awful winters up there. Whoa.
Yes.
Incredibly.
So anyway, she ultimately ended up marrying my dad. They lived in Chicago for some time because my dad had worked with, I think it was something to do with the railroad and packaging, and not 100% sure there. They ended up moving to Cobleskill because my dad, his goal was to be a business owner, and he took on was actually a Texaco bulk plant where they provided the petroleum products, I think initially to gas stations.
Petrol stations, yeah. He had to supply, so he was like the wholesale supplier of petrol to all.
Correct.
Okay. That's
he changed his, he built on that, came to home heating, then he also got into Firestone tires and full car service, and so he had a business. It was that was my whole life, because I didn't come along until they had moved to Cobleskill. They had their first 3 kids out in Chicago, second 3 in Cobleskill.
Wow, family of 6.
Yes, and I'm the baby.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So anyway, settled in Cobleskill would have been late 50s that they settled in Cobleskill. And that was her home.
And she
that
stayed
was where
there
we grew up, and she stayed there.
60 years, for crying out loud.
Yeah, we had grown up in a big home, 50 acres, 14-room farmhouse.
Wow.
Big place.
Yeah.
So when she was down to just her at home, obviously, she didn't stay there. She went to apartment life.
Right.
But she stayed in Cobleskill. She stayed there. Her friends were there. It's sad, though, when they get older and their friends just dying,
time catches
and
up.
it was starting to get lonely. There were just one or two of them left from the original bridge club that I remembered all the time from when I was a kid.
So she was a socialite.
She was
very
much so. She lost her hearing, sadly. She had lost about 90% of her hearing back when I was in middle school. And that did become a little bit of a struggle for her with her. It's hard to be in new situations when there's multiple people talking and you can't hear it well.
Back in the 60s and stuff, they didn't have the hearing aids that were more prominent today. And I'm sure your mom had a whole new lease on life by the 90s when they developed.
Honestly, the hearing aids never really did it. I think she would have benefited had she been a little bit younger.
Yeah.
They might have considered things like cochlear implants or
Sure.
something along those lines. With her age at the time, and they weren't as easy to come across back then either.
Right. It sounds like your mom was class.
She was. She was true class.
Hey, look at the smile on her face, Diane.
Yeah,
She loves talking about her mom.
Well,
That's nice.
Happy memories.
she used to wear her silk pajamas.
Really?
And yeah,
So she is class.
She is class.
Wow.
She's class up in heaven now, too.
Yes.
I know
yeah,
it.
quite a lady.
So as we were beginning to discuss, why did she choose Crossroads House, or who made the decision? Who was it? Was it a family thing?
It was a family decision. So when she was in the hospital, we all managed to get there, and we were all talking together. The nurses, it was someone at the hospital that recommended Crossroads and said, we believe they have an opening at the moment. And, that sparked my attention because I had years past. For about 3 years, I had been a volunteer for Comfort Care.
So you were familiar with it?
Crossroads House.
Okay.
I knew what it meant. I knew how wonderful it was. And then my mom was getting really anxious because her biggest concern, she was never afraid of dying. She was always afraid of being a burden to us.
Right.
And she knew that, our alternate, we would have had her at my home, just brought her back and done her care from there. And none of us would have minded it at all.
She didn't
but
want that.
She didn't want us
again,
to have to care for her.
It goes right down to class. She was making the decisions right up to the end. I'm not
She
going to.
was.
She wanted all of you to enjoy that part of your lives together, even though she knew it was coming to an end.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So when there was an opening, we found there definitely was an opening at Crossroads House, and we explained that to her, and she just, she took a nice deep breath, and she says, I'm good. You know what? Let's go there. I do want to add the one thing that really kept us going through her. She was there for 7 weeks, I believe, Diane. I think it was about 7 weeks at Crossroads. And throughout it all, it wasn't until the last few days that she really started sleeping more. But up until then, she considered it all one big going away party. And that was her term. This is my going away party.
Wow,
and we
what a
had
wonderful...
so many visitors, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. Everybody came to see her. And it was just, she just beamed. She would get her favorite food. Most people would think it's a little odd. She was 94 years old. Her favorite treat was raw oysters.
Oh, my.
And she would sit there and eat a dozen raw oysters almost up until the very end.
Happy as a clam, too.
Happy as an oyster.
Unbelievable.
And so my brother lived in southern Maryland, so when he'd come up, he'd make sure he'd bring up a quart of fresh oysters again. And we prepped the oysters for her. And we have pictures of her enjoying her oysters at Crossroads House.
I was going to ask you when we finish up here.
I
if
actually
I can see
have it on my phone.
I'd love to see a picture of her.
And so it was just, it was perfect for her. And I was telling Diane this morning just a little story even. My mom had really stayed with it until right near the end.
Right.
And it was probably the last 3 days that she was really starting to sleep more.
Right.
And so she passed away on a Sunday morning. That Saturday, my nephew had come in, so her grandson, and he hadn't seen her in a while. And, it's really hard for these kids now to see my mom because those last few days, it really did, everything had changed.
Right.
And so he was emotionally struggling with it. And my mom managed to grab enough strength to just reach up and put her arms around him. And it was beautiful.
Comforted him.
She went back to sleep. And then it was just early afternoon. We were all sitting around in her room having a beer. And for some reason, she woke up again and she just sat up in bed. And she says, what are you doing, having a party? I said, well, yeah, Mom. I said,
That's cool.
She says, what are you drinking? I said, well, we're having beer. Would you like some? And I was kind of joking. She goes, I'd love a sip. I haven't had a beer in a long time.
Wow.
So I poured her a little beer, and she took a sip, and she says, oh, that's good. And she took another sip, and she choked on the second one. She aspirated a little bit. She handed it back to me. She goes, I guess I'm done. And she put it down, and she passed away just, 18 hours later.
Yeah.
But right up until the end, she just was a gem. And even in the very end, we all wanted to be right with her as she passed. Mm-hmm. And I don't think she wanted that.
Right.
So we were sent home at about 11:30 that night. And sure enough, by the time we got the call that she was passing, we were there in probably 7 minutes, but she passed quickly before we went. Yeah. And in hindsight, that was her way. And it was okay. It was another gift that she left us.
We've been talking with Mrs. Spadaccia about her mom, Mrs. Borden, who died just over a year ago at the Crossroads House, and her experiences with them. Thank you for sharing that with us. I really